Yeah, so what I want to talk about today, I think, is actually a fitting start for something like this, a symposium. I mean, first of all, symposium comes from the Greek symphonein, meaning simply to drink together. And I know I, for one, have my whiskey right here. And to share ideas, and especially in our cultural context, starting sort of at our bedrock historically when it comes to sharing and talking about ideas is the classics, which is what I'm going to discuss. Now, when I start talking to people about the classics, one of the first questions I get is, what is that? Including from people at my own university, which I graduated from in May. So, to start off with, classics is simply the study of ancient Greek and Latin, largely their languages and literatures, but also the cultures and the histories associated with them. It's a very wide-ranging field. If you got a liberal arts education sort of back in the day, you would have been studying either back in Augustine's day or even like 300 years ago. You would have been studying what I studied in college, which is kind of an irony because it's been sidelined in academia nowadays, but that's a whole other talk in and of itself. So that's what the subject matter is. It's sort of at the heart of a lot of academia and of university history. So very simply put, I read old books in college and I really enjoyed doing it. Now, something that I also often encountered among, especially like my peer groups and stuff, was I would say like, oh yeah, in my class we're reading the Odyssey, or oh yeah, we're reading Euripides' tragedy, the Bacchae, and people would go, wow, that sounds so fascinating, or oh wow, you must. The worst comment I ever got was, oh, you must be really smart to study those things, because at the end of the day, I was like, no, I just signed up to take this class and I'm running with it and I'm enjoying it. There are, of course, there are really good skills to be gotten out of this. The philological process trains you very well to read a text closely, which prepares you, of course, for all sort of things in life. So that is, of course, a valuable intellectual skill that you can get out of that that's hard to get anywhere else other than reading other literatures. But I always suspected that wasn't what people were getting at when they were just like, oh, wow, that's so cool you're doing that in your classes. That's so fun, because I'd be like, oh, if you want to have fun, just sign up to take the next class with me. History of the English language is open right now. So there's sort of this weird mystified sense about it, and I want to demystify it, because again, this is the heart of what our education has been for a long time. So there is something very universal about it, even though we have this impression it's just for like specialized experts. So my goal is to talk today about how specialization, of course, with anything can help, but to show how this really is a sort of universal thing that we, both as human beings, but especially as Catholics and Christians, can learn a lot from. So I want to start off simply by saying the classics in general are accessible. Not every scrap of Latin poetry or every epigram or every novel ever written, of course, is going to be read by just anyone and understood. There are plenty of things that if I came across them just because I could read the language, I would not know what was going on. There are things, of course, that require high levels of specialization. But in general, the texts that we think of when we think of Latin and Greek culture, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, Sophocles' Theban tragedies about Oedipus the king and his daughter Antigone, these Horace and his odes, these things you've probably heard of here or there. These things actually are very accessible, and that's why they were at the heart of our human formation for so long. The Odyssey is my go-to example because it's one that I just have a soft spot for, although the Aeneid, in fact, is probably my favorite. I have yet to tease that out. The Aeneid is essentially the ancient Roman version of the Odyssey. So the reason I have a soft spot for it is, and why I don't shy away from that is, I realized at the end of the day, this very thick 24-book poem is essentially about human suffering, and that's one of the most relatable things ever. But people don't relate to it because, again, we have this sort of mystified attitude about these texts. It's important to keep in mind that back in their day, these texts would have been sort of the popular literature of their time. Homer was, in a sense, akin to what Marvel is today. He was read everywhere. We don't know when and where he lived, but I like to think there was a guy named Homer. That is contested, though. So these things had a broad appeal back then, and they can still have a broad appeal now because they talk about things that are at the heart of the human experience. And so because I have such a soft spot for the Odyssey, I want to sort of zero in on it. It's what I specialized in college. And I think it's important when you study something to have that sort of soul for it, rather than just a sort of abstract and detached, purely theoretical or abstract interest in it. It's important to be able to bring that heart and that soul to it. Otherwise, you lose a lot of the process, because you are studying humanity here, so you cannot remove your own humanity when you start this process of just reading and getting to know beautiful things. So I want to start with 2 lines from the opening of the Odyssey. The opening of a poem like the Odyssey, the first 20 lines or so, are meant to give you an idea of the themes of the whole text. So they're a good way to get to know both the Odyssey as a whole and the whole culture that the Odyssey was a part of. So, as I already said, this poem is essentially about human suffering. Many of you know the story of Odysseus, but in short, guy gets done with a 10-year war. He's been away for a long time. He misses his home and his family. It takes him 10 years to return home, as he's given trial after trial, until he eventually returns to his home kingdom of Ithaca, is reunited with his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, and is able to win the day after 20 years of absence. So, and this poem chronicles a lot of his struggles along the way. The proem, the introduction, says he suffered many things on the sea: attacked by giants, ensnared by lotus eaters that try to drug him and his whole crew. He wrestles with a bag of winds that the wind god gives him. It's just a sort of list of all these things that he goes through. And I realized at the end of the day, again, this is not some sort of highfalutin intellectual exercise that I'm doing when I first read this poem. I am reading about the sorrows that human beings go through in their lives and the reward that we eventually all return to. When Homer was singing these poems originally, he was singing about what to him was already a distant past. And of course, that past is even more distant to us. And he says, "Speak even to us," addressing the goddess of poetry to inspire him. So, and I think that that line, "Speak even to poem," about how life sucks, that has a bunch of cool monsters and stuff thrown in. Classics is super cool. I know that's campy, but that's literally what it is. It's great. It's not the highfalutin academic silliness that a lot of people associate it with. That exists for literally everything. But when it comes down to it, it's just the books themselves. They're beautiful, just like people love Harry Potter because it's fun, or Brideshead Revisited. I can't believe I just said those 2 in the same breath, but they came to mind and I'm flustered. So, moving on then. And again, Homer outlines for us very well the process of what it's like to read a text closely, which is part of the point of studying classics at the level that I have. Speak even to us. It's the idea that these things from the distant past, Homer was singing about his own distant past, and now he exists in our distant past. The idea that these things can speak to us across time. There are just some hurdles that we have to cross. The other part I want to talk about in the Odyssey is book 11, Odysseus' journey to the underworld, in a scene that's called a Natabasis or a Niquia, depending on how technical you're being. Again, I wanted to throw some fun technical terminology in here because, again, I find this fun. They're fun words. And here we get very closely acquainted with one ancient Greek view of death. There, of course, there was no one uniform thing that people believed in the ancient world about death, but we get acquainted with an overarching view, especially for Homer's time and Homer's audience. Odysseus meets the deceased hero Achilles, the famous, nearly invincible warrior from the Trojan War, which he fought in. And Achilles says this to him: "Say not a word in death's favor. I would rather be a paid servant in a poor man's house and be above ground than a king of kings among the dead." The Greeks, and I cannot stress this enough, in general had a very grim view of death. It was not quite annihilation, it was potentially worse than that. You're a wandering shade, barely a wisp of a creature, ripped from your body. If you achieved greatness in life on the level of a demigod, which of course not a lot of people do, you maybe had a better chance. You had a chance at something better than that, but most people were either tortured for eternity or wandered around as an aimless shade. That's their view. It's a frankly very grim view of the world, and it's not one that would be fun to walk around with in your head. Which is why, when Christianity enters the scene a few hundred years later, we can start to understand why the ancient world in just a few hundred years managed to turn itself so drastically to the Christian worldview, nearly completely, especially the ancient Mediterranean world, which is where these texts that I'm talking about are coming from. Because, of course, death in the Christian worldview is not the view that Achilles gives us in the Odyssey. It's in fact the opposite. Achilles says he would rather be a slave on earth than a king of kings among the dead. Whereas we as Christians, as Athanasius says, because of Christ's reality in the incarnation, we, by being slaves on earth, like Achilles says he desires to be, we can be one with the King of Kings in heaven. So my point is this. There are, of course, some commonalities between us and the ancient world. Again, the one that I like to zero in on is the Odyssey's theme of suffering. But of course, the poets sing about many things that are still relatable to us today. But there's a part of this world that is extremely alien. And what is most alien to us are these very pagan elements. And again, we see that crystallized most clearly in this view of death that I'm talking about. So there are some things that are very close to us still today, and there are other things that are just so far afield from anything in our experience. And that helps us to reconcile our Christian worldview and start to see the hope that we can gain in Christ when we consider all these peoples who for hundreds and thousands of years lived without that hope. And that's where we really start to see the power of the gospel message and why it's so important to announce it. So I think that about wraps up whatever my time would have been. Again, we call this field the humanities because it is the study of humanity itself. It's meant to be accessible. So if you're curious about any book, doesn't have to be one from ancient Greece or Rome, don't be intimidated by it just because it's something that's considered a classic or a landmark of world literature. Open it. The person who put those words on the page, however long ago, be it 50 years or 2,500, did so because they knew that they wanted to say something to a large group of people. And you're a part of that large group of people, and we all can still stand to benefit from the words of artists and poets speaking to us, as Homer says, speak to us even today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. All right, next up we have Kevin. So let me get him on here. There he is. Unmute.
Hello.
All right.
I gotta share my screen because nobody wants to look at this for 10 minutes. Do I get to share my screen or do I have to share my thing with you?
No, do it. Let me make you a co-host real quick. All right, it is all yours. I will mute.
Right, here we go.
Let me
see here. Let me really quick get this back to the beginning. All right. Hello, everybody. I, like Joe, I also have whiskey, but in addition, I also have Jell-O, and I have refilled my whiskey glass because I think we all might need a drink. But cheers. Hope everybody's having a good symposium. And let me, share. Here we go. All right. So I want to tell a story about the Hetch-Hetchty Valley controversy. It is, I call it the fight that killed John Muir. My name is Kevin Brennan. And this symposium brought to you by coronavirus and by the grace of God. So without further ado, here's just a quote by John Muir, who you will know about in just a moment. But God never made an ugly landscape. All that the sun shines on is beautiful, so long as it is wild. He said that in 1897. So John Muir was born in Scotland. He immigrated with his family in 1849 to Wisconsin, where he actually attended the University of Wisconsin. He died in 1914, but we'll get to that. He was the founder of the Sierra Club, which is a naturalist club based out of California. It is a lobbying group, a special interest. He was also a prolific writer, poet, and activist. The setting is in Yosemite, which is near Mariposa, California, sort of in the middle by San Francisco. It was established as a national park in October of 1890. It was the third park to be established. So before the national park system was established in 1916, national parks was kind of a new idea, and protecting large swaths of land was not necessarily something that was very common. So in the 19th century, when Americans were moving west, taking Indian land and settling on the west coast, they didn't really care about this kind of valley here. They didn't care about how beautiful it was. They didn't care about the camping, recreation, any of that, because they needed a place to settle. They needed a place to make money, live, get food, water, all those basic necessities. They wanted to get rich. But in the late 19th century, as areas like California Washington, Oregon, all those places started to get more settled and have more people in them, more permanent communities. They did care about things like recreation. So that's why Yellowstone was established in 1872, Sequoia in 1890, and Yosemite in 1890. So it is among the most popular of the parks. It's the 16th largest, so it's in the top sort of half there, with about 750,000 acres. It's gorgeous. I've never been there, but I would very much like to go. And this is the valley in question, the Hetch-Hetchty Valley. It's on the north side of the park, in the Talumno River Valley, and it is supposedly rather beautiful. This was a picture taken in, I believe, 1908. It was taken in 1908. So the fight, I got to set the stage here. The city of San Francisco wanted to dam the valley to get a water source that was more reliable. John Muir and his conservationists in the Sierra Club, and himself, didn't want them to dam the valley. They thought it was too beautiful and needed to be preserved. The first plan was proposed by Mayor James Fellon of San Francisco, and he wanted to dam the valley, but it was too popular. In October, it was established as a national park. The support wasn't there in Congress, in the legislature, and so it died in 1904 and 1905 by the hands of Ethan Hitchcock, who was Secretary of the Interior at the time. The Sierra Club, it is no coincidence that it was founded in 1892. It did help kill that as well. Now, the second fight is the most popular. This is sort of the most famous of the fights. If you have heard of Hetch-Hetchty, you've heard of this time span between 1906 and 1909, because it involves everybody's favorite president, Theodore Roosevelt. Now, Theodore Roosevelt is supposedly the naturalist, the rugged outdoorsman president. But he actually had a very interesting stance. Now, the big thing that sparked this fight was the San Francisco earthquake and subsequent fires in 1906. That sparked nationwide sympathy. Secretary James Garfield, Secretary of the Interior, approved of the plan that was proposed. Roosevelt himself actually supported the damming, even though he went on a camping trip to Yosemite with John Muir, the very famous camping trip seen here in 1903. But actually, it was a very big success for grassroots movements. The Sierra Club, John Muir, they led a lot of efforts to petition and kill the bill. And it was killed in 1909. This is another picture from the very famous camping trip, actually one I had not seen before, in May of 1903, them on horseback, gorgeous photo. And just to highlight a little bit Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir's relationship, it was very close. They were very good friends. They would write letters to each other a lot. And one of those letters, Theodore Roosevelt said, "I do not want anyone with me but you. And I want to drop politics absolutely for 4 days and just be out in the open with you." What's better than this? Guys being dudes. So this period is one that I like to call the Pax Yosemite, from 1909 to 1913. William Howard Taft was president. He was actually a very huge proponent of preserving natural resources. And though he is famous for his portly figure, he also went on a camping trip with John Muir, and he fully supported them. The Secretary of the Interior, everybody, the influence was finally at the top there for John Muir. It seemed as if the fight was over. But the election of 1912 and the Raker Bill absolutely flipped all of that on its head. Woodrow Wilson was elected president in 1912. Secretary of the Interior Franklin K. Lane was city attorney, who was city attorney under Mayor Fellon, completely supported the plan to dam the valley. And then Johnny Raker, a congressman from San Francisco, submitted H.R. 7202, which, if passed, gave San Francisco the right to dam the valley. And this is where I'm going to actually read from a paper I wrote on this a couple years ago. And this will be my conclusion. The main argument in support of the bill was economic and, ironically, scenic. Raker argued that the damming of the valley increased its value greatly and would be a valuable asset to San Francisco and California. He also argued that the reservoir would make the area more scenic and beautiful than the, quote, swampy state it was in at the time. Muir was astonished at this claim. In his essay defending the valley, he famously says, "Hetch-Hetchty Valley, far from being a plain, common, rock-bound meadow, as many who have not seen it seem to propose, is a Grand landscape garden, one of nature's rarest and most precious mountain temples. Muir is purposefully religious in his language, attempting to appeal to Congress's morality and sense of duty to God Almighty. This appeal, though, was too little too late, and in 1913, Woodrow Wilson signed the Raker Bill into law. Muir, devastated by defeat, was never the same again. Immediately following the signing of the Raker Act, he went back to work on a book about Alaska he had been writing and escaped into the Denali wilderness to search for solitude. He remained optimistic about Hetch-Hetchty in writing to Robert Underwood Johnson, one of the main figures in the fight for the valley. Muir wrote, "As you say, the long drawn-out battle work for nature's gardens has not been thrown away. The conscience of the whole country has been aroused from sleep, and from outrageous evil compensating good in some form must surely come. And now for new work in the new year." Though he was optimistic, he could not shake the physical toll the fight had on him. Less than a year after penning that hopeful letter to Johnson, on Christmas Eve, John Muir died of pneumonia, alone, in a California hospital in Los Angeles. 9 years later, Hetch-Hetchty died. In 1923, the O'Shaughnessy Dam, named after engineer Michael O'Shaughnessy, was completed. The valley flooded and the long fight was over. And that concludes things. John Muir was a hero in my mind of American conservationism. And really the long-term impacts of all of this was that it sparked the modern conservation movement. That this was sort of the keystone, the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, of the first sort of movement of conservation and preservationism, these two different ideas that actually still exist today. We still wonder, should we preserve our resources and their own pure state, or should we use them for our benefit? And this has long-standing, actually Donald Trump a few years ago signed a bill allowing companies to drill on nationally protected land in Utah and Bears, I forget it, Bears something. And so, yeah, that is basically the founding moment of the modern conservation movement in the 20th century and the death of conservationist John Muir. Thank you for listening. Sláinte.
Thank you, Kev. That was a lovely talk. So next up, we have Hannah pontificating about baseball. And I'll remind everyone, if we can try to keep the chat down during the presentations, because there's not really a way to turn off those notifications so we don't distract our lovely presenters, that would be wonderful.
Hello.
I felt very undistracted, I will say.
Kev, I'm glad to hear
yeah,
that.
yeah, I gotta mute me.
You're all good. Everyone else should be muted. So Hannah, the floor is yours.
Hello. I am definitely not as mature as Joe and Kev with their whiskey. I have strawberry lemonade in Malibu in a Bob's Burgers mug. So cheers to that. And I'm going to talk to you about baseball today. When Hunter asked me to be a part of this, and thank you, Hunter, for setting all this up. It's the only thing I really think I know anything about. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit. It's kind of the perfect intersection of my weird array of interests. So I'm going to share my screen. Hunter, can you allow me to share my screen? So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today, bringing a whole bunch of weird little background tidbits about me, and hoping and praying that maybe this will get some of you to watch baseball, because it really is a beautiful thing. So my talk is all about the true love guru, which is baseball. My name is Hannah Buttigieg. I am not related to Mayor Pete, thankfully. And I am very excited to talk to you about something that's been very near and dear to my heart since I was a little tyke. Yes, that is me. I played softball growing up through high school. I was always really in love with the sport. It really was like my first love in life. And so growing up, I grew up in Metro Detroit. And so I was born and raised a Detroit Tigers fan. I adopted the Dodgers when I was in middle school. And for any of you who know anything about the current state of Major League Baseball, you're probably cringing right now because these are two very different, though equally miserable franchises to be in love with as a fan. And so for those of you who don't know, As a Tigers and a Dodgers fan, in my lifetime, I have seen these two teams in the World Series 4 times, which is great. However, they have won a combined total of 0 trophies as a result. So I've had my heart broken by baseball very many times, but I loved it so much, and I do love it so much that I wanted to try out working in baseball. So a couple summers ago, I got an internship at a local indie baseball league, which was a wild experience. And this is my general PSA that unpaid internships are a total scam. But it was a great experience for me. And it really solidified the fact that I had my quarter life crisis. I had actually picked the right profession. And in my day job, I am a 6th grade teacher. So this is my classroom. And just to kind of tie everything in for you here, one thing that we talk about in the field of education is this idea of enduring understandings. So, for example, I teach 6th grade math, and part of our curriculum in 6th grade math, we talk about graphing a point on the coordinate plane. Now, I have a feeling there might even be some of you in this chat right now who don't remember how to graph a point on the coordinate plane, and I certainly don't expect my students to remember all of that when they're 40 years old. But what I do want them to remember, these enduring understandings of the math class that they're in right now, is that they can solve complex problems and they can do something differently than someone else did and still get to the right answer, still get to a viable solution. So we have these ideas of enduring understanding. So that's basically just what we want them to remember when they're 40 years old. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about some enduring understandings that I have gleaned from baseball as far as this point in my life, and how that's kind of shaped my view of faith and love and relationships and the like. So I want to start off with a picture that still genuinely makes me want to cry every time I see it. This is Clayton Kershaw, who is a starting pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers after he gave up what ended up being the game-winning home run in the playoffs last year. It absolutely breaks my heart every time I see it. But the one thing that baseball has taught me time and time again is that love is not always returned as freely as it is given. And as a sports fan, if you are someone who is very passionate and knows a lot about your team and you follow the players and everything, you know how heartbreaking it is to see your team lose. And I can personally say, if it was possible for the amount of love that a person has for a team to will them to a championship, my teams would win every single year. I am as passionate as it gets, but unfortunately, as evidenced in what I said earlier, that definitely doesn't work. So baseball's taught me a lot about unrequited love and what to do when you love someone and they don't love you back, which is a terrifying thing, and something that I talk to my 6th graders about a lot too. And whenever I bring up baseball in it, they are like, "Miss B, are you serious? You're talking about baseball right now?" And maybe some of you are doing the same thing right now. But I can personally say, after the Dodgers lost the World Series in 2017, for reasons which we will not discuss right now, it taught me so much about heartbreak and how I respond to situations like that. Another thing that baseball has taught me about is the ability to let someone go, even when you love them and even if it's painful. And the best example I have for this in my life is the Justin Verlander trade of 2017, which still breaks my heart to this day. I will never forget, I was on Twitter the night before, and the deadline was at midnight for this trade to go through. And I saw a tweet from a Tigers beat writer saying, "The trade's not happening. It's, Verlander's staying a Tiger. Everything's okay." And so I was like, cool. I had class in the morning. So I said, all right, I'm going to bed. I woke up the next morning to several tweets and text messages to Justin Verlander being traded to the Houston Astros. And all of a sudden, it was like the walls came crashing down. Like, Justin Verlander was the face of the Detroit Tigers for so long. He was the homegrown talent. He was the kid who rejuvenated baseball in my hometown. And so to lose the face of the franchise was heartbreaking. He was Tigers baseball to me. I couldn't remember a time when I had watched a Tigers game and I didn't see Justin Verlander in the dugout. And so even though ultimately for him it was a great thing for him. He went to the team that ended up winning the World Series that year. He's had great personal success. He kind of revitalized his career after he went there. It felt like a huge personal loss, despite the fact that I have never met Justin Verlander in my life. There's definitely no way he knows who I am. But it really taught me a lot about this idea that even though it's painful, sometimes you have to let go of someone you love because it could be preventing them from getting to a bigger opportunity. And this really resonates with me a lot in this quote from Father Jacques Philippe in his book Interior Freedom. And when I read this quote, honestly, I can sub in the word baseball for suffering here, and it like still holds the same vibes for me. So it says suffering matures and trains us, it purifies us, teaches us to love unselfishly, makes us poor in heart, humble, gentle, and compassionate toward our neighbor. And I can honestly say that this is what baseball has done for me. It truly has taught me so much about how I interact with other people, especially I think in interactions with people who are fans of different teams, and even with people who hold some type of animosity toward my teams. So the way that you interact with people who are fans of different teams, you can find these commonalities, and you still love the game. And even though you want to jump up and down and cheer and scream because your team won and their team lost, it says a lot about a person, I think, in how they treat the people of who are fans of the opposing team. And so that brings me to another larger point now, is with everything that's going on in the world. We don't have baseball right now. We should have had opening day yesterday, and instead we have nothing. And for a lot of people, I can especially speak to my own experience here, sports are a safe haven and a place where I can turn on the TV for 3 hours a day, every day in the summer, and I can just escape to the baseball field, and I don't have to worry about anything else that's going on. And I can just think about what pitch the pitcher is going to throw next, or if they're going to be able to score that runner from third base, because for whatever reason, the Tigers can never manage to do it. And the off season's always been difficult. It's always like torturous waiting from the last out of the World Series to the first pitch on opening day. But it's taught me so much about this idea that absence does really make the heart grow fonder. And I know that with opening day postponed, obviously it was the right decision to not have baseball happening right now, but it's going to make everything so much sweeter when it does come back, hopefully in the next few months. And then my last kind of point that I'm going to hit on here with baseball is something that you hear a lot when a team is struggling, when a team is doing really poorly, is the manager and the players will all talk about how they're really trying to focus on the fundamentals. And so it reminds me so much of this quote from Mother Teresa, do small things with great love. And so whenever you see like baseball players, professional baseball players who've been playing their entire life, they make millions of dollars every day before a game, they go out on the field, they field grounders, they take batting practice. They do all of these simple things that kids in T-ball do at their own practices or before their own games start. And so it's these little things that really make a huge difference. And when it comes to my own life and my prayer life and all of this, it's this huge idea that, we get so focused on the big picture and all these big decisions in our life, but baseball reminds me so often that I need to hone in on those little things, because it's those little things that make all the difference. So I hope that this video or this presentation inspires you in some way. I just love this sport so much, and I just want, if this makes it so that you want to watch the sport, then that's great. I genuinely hope that more people watch this beautiful game, because it really is incredible. So if you want to hear more of me yelling about baseball, then obviously feel free to follow me on Twitter. I can only guarantee that there will be a lot of yelling once the season begins. So once again, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the talks tonight.
Thank you, Hannah, for that lovely talk. Next up, we have Laura. And just again, please try not to chat in the chat during talks. I know it's super tempting, but I want to make sure that we are giving the people talking the respect and attention they deserve. So with that, Laura, I believe the floor should be yours.
Me, hopefully. Can we see it? Hunter, can you see it? Okay, great, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'd like to propose a toast. That's the first lyric of Elaine Stritch's signature song, The Ladies Who Lunch, which appears in Stephen Sondheim's 1970 musical Company. The show was nominated for a record 14 Tony nominations and won 6, and has been revived numerous times on and off Broadway. The song is about Manhattan socialites whose lives are filled with mindless shopping, wine lunches, and matinees, and about the women like Elaine's character who can see it all for the bullshit that it is, but feel trapped.
Look into their eyes and you'll see what they know. Everybody dies. A toast to that invincible bunch. The dinosaurs surviving the crunch. Let's hear it for the ladies who lunch. Everybody rise.
Brassy, skyscraper tall, and with a voice once described as like a corncrake wading through bourbon on the rocks, Elaine Stritch was a natural scene stealer. Not strikingly beautiful, though with wondrously long and shapely legs, there was no one quite like her in show business. Over the course of a 50-year acting career, Elaine Stritch overcame monstrous personal struggles, alcoholism, diabetes, the death of her husband, and somehow came out on top. In an entertainment business that favors the young and the beautiful, Elaine Stritch blossomed in her old age and refused to be limited by conventional expectations of what a lady is supposed to be. When acting opportunities grew scarce, Elaine created her own cabaret at the Public Theater in New York City at age 75, for which she won her first Tony Award. Yes, she got old, and she owned it. Elaine and I only occupied New York at the same time for a year. I moved to New York City from Indiana in 2012. Elaine retired to her home state of Michigan in 2013 and died at the age of 89 on July 17, 2014. Elaine left Detroit at 17 to attend the dramatic workshop of the New School. Some of her most famous fellow students included B. Arthur and Marlon Brando. She made her Broadway debut in 1946 and appeared in numerous stage productions in New York and London, including Company. Offstage, Elaine starred in a British TV show called Two's Company for 4 seasons. In the US, Elaine also auditioned for the Golden Girls, but she blew the audition and lost the role to her old classmate, B. Arthur. My first exposure to Elaine Stritch was actually her TV work. She played Alec Baldwin's TV mom, Colleen Donaghy, on NBC's 30 Rock.
Mother,
Yes,
Avery and I are having a baby.
I see.
May I remind you, this is good news.
This is a disgrace. What are my chums at the Death Shore Retirement Community going to say when I tell them that my unmarried son has knocked up a Protestant?
Oh, I knew you would do this. Take a happy moment and ruin it. Just like you did when I won that scholarship at my high school graduation.
It should have gone to the other boys.
Thank you. In addition to her first Tony Award, Elaine won an Emmy for the televised production of her cabaret, which was called Elaine Stritch at Liberty, which was full of colorful stories about her life and career. In it, she wore her trademark sheer black tights and white button-down shirt, no pants. She revived the cabaret in Elaine Stritch at the Carlisle, the hotel in which she lived until she left New York. Elaine Stritch was an alcoholic. She was just 14 years old when she had her first drink, but she got sober late in life. She called herself a recovering alcoholic. Elaine claimed that on Judy Garland's closing night at the Palace, which was Judy Garland's comeback performance, she and Judy were still at it, drinking until 8 o'clock in the morning, until Judy put out her hand to Elaine and said, "Elaine, I never thought I'd say this, but good night." Elaine Stritch was a Roman Catholic. Her uncle was Cardinal Samuel Stritch, an Archbishop of Chicago. She also lived in a convent while attending acting school in New York. Elaine said of her relationship to Catholicism, "Listen, there's a lot that's fucked up about the Catholic Church, but there's a lot that's fucked up about me. There's a lot that's fucked up about you, quite frankly." This convent girl naivete got 17-year-old Elaine in some trouble with the actor Marlon Brando. Their first date together got awkward when they went back to his apartment and he started to put on his pajamas. She left his apartment in a hurry and they never spoke again.
I don't get any points for being the best girl, the good girl from the Sacred Heart Convent who didn't sleep with Marlon Brando. I didn't know how to sleep with Marlon Brando. I didn't know what any of that was for. I knew about kissing, and that was it.
Luckily, Elaine learned to love again, though tragically she became a widow. When she was 47, Elaine married an actor named John Bay. It was her first marriage. They shared 10 years together. He died of cancer in 1983. Elaine said John was the love of her life, no question about it. She never married again. Elaine was also a diabetic. In her cabaret, Elaine talked about how in her old age, she moved into the Carlisle Hotel, not just because she liked it, but because at a hotel, you're always surrounded by people who can help you if you start to stumble when your blood sugar gets dangerously low. Elaine also had arthritis and was treated for stomach cancer. Still, she died in her sleep. Maybe that's surprising, given what a hard-drinking, fast life she lived. When she left New York, she was finally ready to let go. She claimed she was just tired of living here and said, "I gave it a 65-year shot, and that was enough." Elaine never really stopped performing. Even when she was long past the age most actresses are told they're expired, no longer sexy, no longer interesting. Elaine leaned into her age. She performed until she physically couldn't anymore. In 2014, the year she died, Elaine said, "I don't think I'm going to die tomorrow or even 2 weeks from now or even ever. I just don't know. Who the hell knows what's going to happen to them? Nobody." Isn't that comforting? Nobody has a clue. I like that we don't know. And I like it's somebody else's decision, not mine. This last clip is a song she performed at Stephen Sondheim's 80th birthday celebration. She's 84 years old in this clip, which I watch all the time. It helps me remember that even the scariest shit that I'm going through will someday make for a really, really hell of a good story. And even when I've been depressed, this song always reminds me to keep going. And maybe I can live to be 89 if I can just hang in there. Elaine did.
Black Sable one day, next day goes into hot. But I'm here. Top billing Monday, Tuesday you're touring in stock. But I'm here. First, you're another slow-eyed bell. Then someone's mother, then your camp. Then you career from career to career. I'm almost through my memoirs and I'm here. I've gotten through, hey lady, aren't you hooses? Wow, what a looker you were. Or better yet, sorry, Jesus, I thought you were hooses. Whatever happened to her? Time to come time. I've seen all of my dear. Still here. Flash velvet sometimes. Sometimes just pretzels and beer. I have run the gambit. A to Z. 3 cheers, damn it. Say nothing. I got through all the last year. And I'm here. Christ knows. At least I was there. And I'm here. Look who's here. I'm still here. Yes.
Okay. And that does it for me. Thank you very much for letting me talk forever about this woman who is so deeply important to me. I love Elaine Stritch. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That was lovely. And now I know many things about Elaine Stritch.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Patrick, who will put his video up in a moment, I presume. There he is.
You presume correctly.
Oh, we love to see it.
All right.
Let me put you in the spotlight, make you the co-host, and we will get this show on the road.
I have nothing to screen share because I like my face too much. But now I'm realizing that the sun went down. So 1 second.
Well, good. I will hand it over to you.
Backlighting is important. Every cameratographer knows it. All right. We open on a hot July day in 2011 in a conference center somewhere outside Atlanta. I'm still not sure. 1,500 men aged 13 to 18 shuffle into a conference room for a talk. We are, of course, at a Steubenville conference, and this is a men's talk. And for any of you who have been to a men's talk, which is statistically, because we're at a Catholic event, 33% of you, it went exactly the way you would expect it to. It was very smelly because no one knew how to use deodorant anymore. The gentleman leading the talk was someone who you don't know the name of, jumps up there in a tight flannel shirt, spiked blonde hair, and a 90s boy band looking beard. And he goes, "All right, fellas, the ladies are gone. Let's all grunt. 1, 2, 3. I was like, thank God. I've been holding in my grunts for the last 3 days. And then he tells us, and this is not a joke, he tells us we're going to play something called Chuck Norris the Game. The backlighting isn't good. He tells us we're going to play something called Chuck Norris the Game, in which he says 2 things and you have to figure out how Chuck Norris would kill something using, I don't know, like a crocodile with a stapler, and you have to describe how he would do it. It was a dated reference even back then. I still am not sure who Chuck Norris is. And meanwhile, I talked to my friends in my high school who went to the girls' session, the girls in the group, and they said the women's talk went something that was a little typical for a women's talk. They talked about friendship bracelets and sang Taylor Swift songs. And honestly, I might have preferred that to Chuck Norris the Game. It's an unfortunate trend in men's and women's talks that we have the stereotypical men's talk over here and the stereotypical women's talk over here. All of the women's talks were essentially, you could summarize them as, you're a princess and no man deserves you except Jesus, be a nun. And then all the men's talks were, for the love of God, please stop watching porn, which was a funny joke until that thing happened earlier. But that's essentially the gist of the talks, right? And for me, as a middle schooler, I was going into high school. I was the chorus kid who did theater. I wasn't a sports kid. When my friends in elementary school would play soccer, I would say, I'll be the referee. I didn't know the rules of soccer. Turns out they're incredibly simple. Touch it with your foot, not your hands. But I would still be the referee, right? And I wanted to know, what is the difference between men and women? And when I say that, the first response is, oh, well, men have this and girls have this. That's not what I'm talking about, right? I knew there was something that spiritually made me a man, and there was something spiritually that made someone else a woman, and I wanted to know what that was. And every men's talk was like, well, what it means to be a man is you're like super virtuous, bro. Brother. I'm not Brother Teresa, by the way. And that just didn't cut it for me, because women are also called to be virtuous, right? And so I studied theology at Franciscan University, and for a lot of the time there, I wanted to know the answer to that question. I took a theology of the body class, and so I got some information there, but I really found the answer to that question. What does it mean spiritually to be a man or a woman? I really found that answer in a book by someone named Edith Stein, otherwise known as St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. In her Essays on Women, book 2, she talks about how God gave men and women, he gave Adam and Eve 3 vocations at the beginning of creation. First and foremost, he said, let us create men and women in our own image, right? And so Edith Stein says our first and foremost vocation as men and women together is to image the Trinity. That's our first vocation. And then later in Genesis 2, when he creates Adam and Eve, he says, fill the earth and subdue it, right? Fill the earth and subdue it. And these are the 2 vocations that are presented together for a reason. And so St. Edith Stein says that that mankind, not just masculinity, not just femininity, mankind as a whole has been given this threefold vocation at the beginning: to fill the earth, to till the earth, and to image the Trinity. And this flies in the face of what I've read in a lot of Christian books on masculinity and femininity. It's not a dichotomy, right? Because you see, a lot of the times people will say, well, men are more physical and women are more spiritual and emotional, or men are like more visual and women are more like auditory, right? You hear these things in psychology books. They're like, men have this brain kind and women have this kind of brain, and it's too dichotomous, right? The reality is that masculinity and femininity are not a dichotomy, it's a complement. It's complementary. They're complementary. Because see, in the vocation to fill the earth, we have a little bit of a biological clue to some spiritual reality. When it comes to filling the earth, yes, it is a team effort, but let's be honest, fellas. It's more on them. Filling the earth is a group effort, right? Well, not a group, but it's a team effort. And it's the bulk of the work is on the woman, right? And then for tilling the garden, right, which was Adam's vocation, his body is built for that primarily. But we should conclude that like filling the earth is for man to assist and for woman to accomplish most of, then subduing the earth is a primary vocation of man, but woman is there to be a divine help, right? And this divine help translated as translated from the word azer, which means divine help, not just helpmate, is what God is talking about there. He's not just saying, oh, women are supposed to help men out. He's saying men and women are supposed to be a divine help for each other. You see, she is responsible for filling the earth in a unique way, but he needs to be there to help. And he's responsible for tilling the garden, right? He's responsible for perfecting the world around us, but she plays an important role. Now, what happened, right? We sinned. And we talk a lot about the loss of relationship between us and God, but we don't talk about what the fall did between us as men and women. What happened at the fall was just like they grabbed those fig leaves to cover themselves, to cover what was theirs, they grabbed their vocations and brought them to themselves, right? They took what was more proper to them and they said, no, this is completely mine now. So that's why God says, your desire will be for man and he will lord it over you, right? Woman says, okay, filling the earth is now just me. The only thing we need men for, right? The only thing we need men for is for babies. And then men say, I'm going to lord it over you. I'm going to take my command to subdue the earth and I'm going to apply it to you. I'm going to say, I'm going to lord it over you, right? And in that grabbing, we lost our ability to image the Trinity properly. And this is why in the Old Testament, we see kind of a bastardization of marriage. We see the allowance of divorce. We see polygamy, right? This in the beginning, it was not so. God allowed this because of our weakness. But see, that quote comes from Matthew 17, and that's Jesus talking to the Pharisees about whether or not we should allow divorce, whether or not God allows divorce. Says Moses allowed it because this was before the new covenant, but in the new covenant, this is restored. Marriage is a sacrament now for a reason. John Paul calls it the primordial sacrament. It was always there, but it's special now in the new order of the gospel. John Paul II says that original nakedness, which is what we had in the beginning, where we were naked without shame, is recovered, but only in marriage. Original nakedness, something that we had in Eden to begin with, is recovered in marriage. And so similarly, Eden is renewed by life in Christ in a Christian marriage. And so the title of this talk is Renewing Eden, how complementary men and women will save the world or something. I titled it in like 2 seconds. The reason it's called Renewing Eden is because of this restoration of not just original nakedness, but also of our imaging of the Trinity. Augustine pointed out two examples of the Trinity. One is the psychological and one is the family. The family analogy is the father loves the husband loves his wife and the wife loves her husband, and that love together makes a child, just like the father loves the son and the son loves the father, and that love becomes another person, the Holy Spirit. And so we should we should look at this. We should look at this restoration of Eden, and it should encourage us in our daily lives, I think. And I do want to give a practical takeaway from this talk, because we're coming towards the end. I nerd out about this a lot. I'm trying to write a book about this. But what does this mean? What does this mean for you in your everyday life? It means don't focus on what the other people are doing. It means don't focus on the way that men are living their masculinity incorrectly, and don't focus on the way other women are living their femininity incorrectly. It means focus on the way that you as an individual are living your masculinity or your femininity, and saying, am I lording my power over women? Am I lording my power over other men? Women, am I using my gender as a weapon, right? Am I using my sexuality as a weapon? Or perhaps like I don't really know the ways that women abuse men. I don't know. I've not been abused, thank God, but I don't really know the ways that you know what I'm saying. That was yeah. It's about examining ourselves, right? And then understanding, not thinking in dichotomy, right? Not promoting any kind of dichotomy. So as a takeaway, right? If you are married, or if you're looking to be married, right? Remember what you're trying to accomplish in this. You are called to be a divine help to a man or a woman, right? You are called to help a woman make a house into a home, or you are called to help a man make his house that he has built into a home, right? It's something that could summarize this talk is that a man can build a house, but a woman makes it a home, right? And that's a dual effort, and that's what we call complementarity. So next time you hear something about theology of the body and you're like, oh, this is just that sex stuff, remember what it really is at the heart of it. It's at the heart of finding the spirituality of tilling the earth and the spirituality of filling the earth. As men and women together, we image the Trinity. Thanks so much, Hunter, for organizing this. I appreciate you doing this. Thank you all for listening to me. I appreciate it. Listen to the crunch.
I was waiting for that shameless plug. But thank you, Patrick. That was
You're welcome.
Super lovely. All right. Next up, we have Sarah talking about a good pal, Joseph Pieper, who I have not read because I'm a bad person. Let me get her up here. Sarah, hello.
Hello. You've disabled screen sharing. Can you hear me?
I think you should be able to now because you are a co-host.
Okay. Awesome.
Let me know.
Oh, I can.
Perfect. I will mute myself, stop the video, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I have been writing about Joseph Pieper this whole year because he is the topic of my thesis. So I know like way too much about Joseph Pieper, and I think that he is a really important figure to know about for a lot of reasons. But today I'm not going to talk really about his philosophy at all. I'm going to talk about why you should listen to him, why you should take a break, and how he thinks that will make you happy. So basically the point of philosophy. Okay. Who is Joseph Pieper? Why does he matter? This is the cathedral in Munster, Germany. He was a German moral philosopher.
I do not think your screen is sharing right now.
No.
If there's anything on it.
Wait. Oh, sorry. Here we go.
All good.
I didn't actually get anywhere. So.
Perfect.
Yes?
There it is.
Ah, okay. Here, look at this beautiful church. Okay. He was a German moral philosopher. He was born in northern Germany. He lived through a pretty tumultuous time of Germany's history. He was growing up during World War II or World War I. He graduated and went to college during the Weimar Republic. He was a young adult when the Nazis took over.
Sorry to stop you again. It is showing like 2/3 of your PowerPoint.
No.
I don't know
Okay.
if there's a screen.
No? We're just gonna...
Yeah, we have like the left 2/3 right now.
Hold on 1 second.
Yep.
It's showing the golden ratio. Nope. Well,
You can do it
let
from here and
me-
we can see most of the thing if you
you
want.
can see it.
Yep.
That's good enough.
Perfect.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so he was pretty much living during the most tumultuous country during the most tumultuous decades of the 20th century in Europe. He published a book that was, he published several books that came out and then were immediately censored by the Nazis. So that was a fun time. He spent a full decade where he wasn't able to teach as a professor because of they didn't like him. So he really lived through an interesting time. He is sometimes thought of as a Thomist, but he was against certain kinds of Thomism, uses of Thomas as sort of a bludgeon rather than a guide to the truth. He was pretty interested in engaging with contemporary philosophy in his time. And he was a philosopher. He was very clear. He was not a theologian. His central point is that the moral actions that we should take derive from objective reality, that we have to orient our way that we interact with the world in accordance with the way that the world really is. So perception is really important to him. Otherwise, you don't really know. You can't know how to act if you don't understand the world. Another really important idea for him is createdness, that we are created by God, and the only way that we can understand how to interact with the world correctly is if we realize that we are humans. We realize the obligations as well as the rights that come with human nature, but because he was living in a time where the human nature of people was under attack, he really consciously formulated his ideas to sort of counteract these thoughts that certain people were not, deserving of life. So why listen to Joseph Pieper? He read more Aquinas than you ever will, and I will stick to that. That's just true. He is also a really good guide to the Western Christian tradition. So he was interested in the truth. That was his guiding principle as a philosopher. He was not interested in the kind of philosophy that is like historical criticism. And his goal was to make his philosophy understandable to anyone. He spent a lot of time teaching at a teacher's college rather than teaching students who were planning to go into philosophy as a career. So how do you be happy? The bad news is rest is a gift, and there's nothing that you can do to earn happiness. You can sort of earn things that may make you happy, but happiness itself is not something that can be achieved. But you can create the kind of life that allows you to receive the gift of happiness. But what is happiness? Happiness is, in its fullest form, contemplating God in divine worship. This is not an intuitive. This is not the intuitive definition of happiness. However, I will not be taking questions at this time. This is what happiness is. If you would like to argue about this, I am happy to do so. You can also read Pieper on this topic. He wrote a book that's called Happiness and Contemplation. But assuming that happiness is divine worship, how do we attain happiness here in 2020? Rest, leisure. This is Pieper's idea that most people know him for. The idea, the work, leisure, the source of culture is his biggest, most probably widely read book, although I do not think it's his best. He wrote this book in Munich, or not Munich, Münster, while under occupation after World War II. He had spent the war in the army as a psychologist. So there's a lot that I'm not going to go into this. But anyway, do we even know, do we need to know how to relax? Is it not obvious? No, it's not obvious. We do not know how to relax. Why don't we know that? We are unable to recognize leisure because of the world that we live in, which is dominated by the idea of total work. Total work is a concept that's really important in Leisure, the Basis of Culture, and explains a lot of things about our society, where work is sort of idolized as a god. Work is prioritized over all other demands of life. But total work also involves being unable to rest. So when you think of your life as divided into work and not work, you're unconsciously like participating in this ideology that puts work at the center of life, not you know, any of the other possibilities that you could put as your reason for existing. The problem with the ideology of total work is you can't work your way to rest. There's nothing that you can do to achieve a feeling of relaxation. You just objectively, it's not something that you can work to get. It is something that is given to you as a gift. So here's Pieper on this. I am just going to read this quote because he's good. So, there can be no such thing in the world of total labor as space which is not used on principle, no such thing as a plot of ground or period of time withdrawn from use. There is, in fact, no room in the world of total labor, either for divine worship or for a feast, because the worker's world, the world of labor, rests solely on the principle of rational utilization. Everything in the world that's governed by work is assigned a value and assigned a place based on whether it's useful or not. This infects all disciplines. So like the arts, a lot of times people will describe the arts, liberal arts, as like useful so you can learn how to think. There's nothing in the world, you know, there's nothing in the world that's allowed to be just good in itself. So in order to achieve this gift, you have to pause from work. You have to allow there to be silence in your life. You have to assent to your limitation. You have to be able to say, I literally can't work anymore today. I'm not just going to continue to stare at my computer screen and try, you know, to come up with something. Like you will never get to you will never get to rest. And the act of leisure is, I mean, it's difficult to describe, but philosophically, Pieper sort of describes it as welcoming mystery into your being through contemplation. And it, by practicing leisure, you are rejecting the idea that work is what should own all of the world. You affirm that God is the creator, that he has sovereignty over creation. Side note, I think the next book that I'm going to describe, In Tune with the World, is a better book than Leisure, the Basis of Culture, and no one really thinks this, so that's my take of the night. Okay, festival. What is festival? Divine worship. Divine worship is an essential element of every human culture. So Leisure, the Basis of Culture is really sort of a negative book. It describes these conditions of the world that we're in where we don't allow rest. We don't allow ourselves basically to be happy because we are seeking to earn money or fame. And we don't allow space to just give over our time to God. So this is a really weird way to relate to the world, you know, basically considering human history and all cultures. So this is an image from the Durga festival in, I think, in Calcutta. All cultures have these festivals. So that our culture has mostly rejected worship is a really serious and concerning thing. What is a festival? A festival is basically an ascent to the world. Ascent meaning an affirmation that it's good and that it's beyond us, that we haven't created the world, that we, you know, we have received our participation in life as a gift. So you sort of, you don't necessarily, you know, you're not consciously thinking that when you're at Mass, but being grateful for this opportunity to worship, being grateful for your entire life, like that is the attitude that you should be bringing with you. So a festival is basically leisure, but like times a bazillion. So let's see. So when you look at the world, you see the world's goodness, whatever you have been blessed with, even if that's just the ability to breathe for another day. Your response to the goodness of the world should be thanksgiving. Here's a picture of Corpus Christi. This was one of Pieper's examples of festivals that he really liked to talk about. It's sort of the society's intense affirmation of the goodness of the world. The whole city comes together and puts a ton of money and effort toward making the city beautiful for just like one day, you know. It's not, there's not a good economic explanation for it, and it's wrong-headed to think of one. So if you were thinking like, oh, well, we can justify this because, you know, we'll have tourists, like, no, that's not fun. You have not achieved the festival because your point of what you're doing is worship. It's not to make money. And festivity, the goal of festivity is to allow us to step out of time and to participate in the eternal festival. This is a really deep concept that I'm not going to talk about, but this, I think, is one of the most beautiful concepts that anytime we rest, anytime we allow ourselves space to contemplate or create art or just sit outside and stare at the sky and recognize that the world is good, that is a participation in the joy that exists in the universe because God is the source of all joy. And we, by experiencing that joy and being grateful for the goodness that is in the world, we allow ourselves to participate in this festival that's going on at all times on earth and in heaven. Here's a partial bibliography, I think. Yeah. Okay. That's the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was lovely.
I think that was too long, but I'm not really sorry. So
Only slightly, and I'm not sorry either. So, all right. Next up, we have Noah. If you're here, I want to flip on your audio. Hello.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes. Let me give you the screen, and then it will be all yours.
Okay, well, I'm not fancy with technology, so I don't have a PowerPoint or anything like that, but I'm just gonna be telling my story, how I went from being a anti-Catholic cult member to becoming Catholic, which I told people very, very often that I was never going to become Catholic. So I was raised in a non-denominational home until I was 9 years old. And then my parents joined a Christian cult where we did not celebrate Christmas or Easter or Halloween or Valentine's Day. We pretty much only celebrated Thanksgiving, birthdays, and patriotic holidays because all those other holidays were pagan and Catholic. So we weren't going to mess with that. We also did evangelization, so on the streets of Milwaukee and Indianapolis and other cities around the country, we would go and witness to people and would say, free book about your creator, how he died to save you from the hell we all deserve. Are you a Christian, sir or ma'am? And then we'd engage with those people in those conversations. All of us girls wore dresses down to our ankles. And we all had long hair because long hair was a symbol of God and man's authority over our lives. We also practiced separation. So when I was 9, we left the church that I had been a part of my whole life, and we separated from everybody that went to that church, my oldest brother, my aunts, my uncles, cousins, grandparents, and basically became isolationists on a mission to save the world. And to battle for Jesus so that we could make it inside the kingdom. And that's a little bit confusing to explain, but really quickly, we believed that you were once saved, always saved. So your salvation was totally a free gift. But then once you became saved, you needed to work to prove to God that you loved him and to earn his rewards. So if you were good enough, you could be welcomed into the kingdom of heaven instead of being outside the city for eternity where you would weep and gnash and grind your teeth. So we would do evangelization and separate from people in order to prove our worthiness and our holiness to God so that we could enter that kingdom. And we kind of developed expertises, and mine became Catholic. So I would go online and argue with Catholics frequently as a 15 to 18-year-old. And I was always fascinated when I would be on the streets or in the airports and see priests and nuns walk past. I was like, I wanted to talk to them, but they always avoided me. And then when I was 21, I left the cult. That's a little bit of a longer story, but just suffices to say that I had a crisis of faith and really came to the point that I did not think that I could continue to grow and that I would become bitter in the church, in that group, if I stayed. So God provided a way of escape, and I was able to move out. I was disowned, so I left behind my parents, one of my brothers, and my 4 younger sisters, and moved out by myself and lived in this world alone, pretty much. Fast forward a few months, I was riding my bike past a parish called Holy Angels, and I thought to myself, you know what, I'm curious. I just want to go in there and see what's inside these pagan temples after all. I went in, and the priest there was doing a baptism of a baby, which I was raised that was not kosher. And I talked to the priest afterwards, and he mentored me for a few months and was really helpful, such that I was like, I like these Catholics. They're great. They're so much fun to play with and to like talk to. And I'm never going to become one, but I love hanging out with them. And one of the most interesting things was one time we went to Holy Hill, and on our way back, the priest asked me what kind of music I liked, and I said Within Temptation, and he knew it. I was like, what? A priest knows Within Temptation? That's so crazy. Because I had been raised to believe that priests were like scary, terrible, horrible people that weren't normal at all. And maybe some priests might wonder if they're normal, but they're pretty normal in my opinion. So once I had that encounter with that priest, everywhere I moved from then on, I had to find my Catholic priest, my Catholic parish, and my Catholic friends, even though, again, never going to become Catholic. So I moved to Oshkosh, where I finished my bachelor's degree. This is all in Wisconsin, by the way. And hung out at the Newman Center. And admittedly, part of the reason I hung out at the Newman Center was the free food and the comfiest couches on the campus for sleeping. But it was also Jesus luring me there, I guess. And I had lots of conversations with people, but for me, the hang up was I felt that the Eucharist was profoundly dishonoring to Jesus, that the idea that Jesus could be eaten was so horrific to me. Like, how could you dishonor him that way? And so I was vehemently opposed to anything Catholic because of that key point. Well, I ended up moving to Indiana, and that's where I am here right now. And in December of 2015, I went through a spiritual crisis where I really started wrestling with some of the spiritual wounds from the cult, especially with God the Father, because I had been raised that he was vicious, angry, wrathful, ready to strike you with lightning if you step out of bounds or anything like that. And I told one of my mentors, I wish there could be a bi-unity instead of a trinity, because Holy Spirit's great, Jesus is great, I don't like God the Father. So when I moved to Indiana, I found my Catholic priest, my Catholic parish, and my Catholic friends. And the Catholic parish that I found had a perpetual adoration chapel. And I ended up going there almost every day for hours at a time during this. And I would read, I would journal, I would pray. I just felt peace, a sense of peace that I didn't feel anywhere else. And that's my parish today. So we had the Divine Mercy Journal in every seat at the Adoration Chapel. And so I read through that book during the course of 2.5 months. And it was February 16th, I want to say, in 2016, where I walked out of my house. And being from Wisconsin, February is usually cold, but it was 60 degrees down here in Indiana. And I said, wow, Daddy, it's a beautiful day. And I was like, wait, what? I just called God Daddy? Huh? And then the next visit, I was at the Adoration Chapel. I looked at the host and I was like, okay, you are Jesus, because a piece of bread couldn't have accomplished the healing that I felt over those 2.5 months of sitting with him and just praying and asking him questions about my life and journaling and wrestling through all the stuff that I endured inside the cult. So I was overjoyed that this is Jesus, and my next thought was, oh shoot, I gotta become Catholic now, which I didn't necessarily want to do at that point. But as I met with a priest and I started asking questions and looking at the other doctrines, once you believe the Eucharist is the Eucharist, like everything else was kind of like, I don't care, I'm just gonna accept it. But I wrestled through it and came to believe that it was the truth. And I ended up arguing my way to being confirmed in September of 2016 instead of waiting until 2017. And that was the happiest day of my life, to be able to receive Jesus and the Eucharist for the very first time. I mean, I still remember, at that point I received in the hand, and I still remember holding my hand and being like, God himself is in my hand right now. Like, he who should be holding me is letting me hold him, and he who should consume me is letting me consume him. I was like, whoa. I was literally stopped in my tracks just looking at the host. And then I was like, oh wait, I need to actually move and like consume him. And funny story, one of my friends, when it was over, they asked me like, where do you want to go eat? And I was just like, heaven, because I was so not ready to come down to earth after the amazingness of being able to be confirmed and to be able to receive the Eucharist for the first time. Like, I still get Twitter passionate about it because I'm pretty much in love with Jesus and he's the best. And so that's the shorter version of how I became Catholic. So yeah, oh, and by the way, John the Baptist is my confirmation saint, and he is the bossest of them all. He's the bossest of all saints, in my opinion. I mean, Jesus himself said that no one born of women is greater than John the Baptist. And that does include Mary because she was born of a woman, just FYI. Which she understands my love of John the Baptist over her, and she's okay with it. We've established this fact. I'm kind of rambling right now, but that's what I do. So I'm kind of done, but if you have questions, like, I am totally willing to answer them.
Thank you so much, Noah. That was so beautiful.
Isn't Jesus the best? I mean, really.
He's the reason we're all here.
Let's have Chris back now. Okay.
We're all with you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Next up, Michaela. I'm going to wherever your video is. I got you.
Ah, there we go.
Hello. Do you just want to do audio?
I can do video too. That's fine.
How are you?
Start my video. Oh, hello.
There you are.
So, introducing point. I promise I have more books in the Twilight series. They're just over there. Okay, so basically, I'm just gonna like hop in. I'm gonna leave the chat up if you guys have questions. You can just ask them. So basically, every single year, because I don't have enough to do, I choose a topic of personal research. I've done this since probably I was 18. And last year, I did a year of research directly to spite Margaret Atwood, who, if you guys don't know, is the author of The Handmaid's Tale, a book that I deeply resent on pretty much every single level. And so basically the idea that I resented in The Handmaid's Tale is the nature of consent within Christianity, but specifically the nature of consent within Mary, right? Because the whole point is The Handmaid's Tale, and Margaret Atwood directly co-opts language from the Annunciation, right? Other than the title Handmaid, there's this like super dark, like blessed be the fruit language that they use for children who are the product of rape in this dystopian society and all these things, which is of course taken directly from the Hail Mary, where we say blessed be the fruit of your womb. And so Atwood essentially takes the Annunciation and warps it into something completely dark and completely cruel, which it just isn't. And so, like all nerds, I got real mad and I hit the books. And what I found was that not only does Mary have agency, she truly does have the perfection of feminine agency. Sorry, I have a fan going. She is the perfection of feminine agency in so many ways. So I'm just gonna like talk about it. This is not complete. By all means, ask me more questions afterwards or like DM me on Twitter. So basically there's 3 ways that Mary has agency within the tale of the Annunciation, right? So first off, we know about the Annunciation because of Mary, right? Not only is there tons of like personal events and insights specifically from her thoughts and emotions, but also church tradition has held for a really, really long time that St. Luke actually personally traveled to Mary and did an interview with her, essentially. He also painted a picture of her or something. There's like tons of stuff about it, right? So from the get-go, what we're looking at is a woman telling her story of interaction with the divine in her own words. This is unheard of for like literature. I'm just on a liturgical, like, let's pretend that like this is just a book, right? This isn't a thing, right? If you look at other mythologies, specifically Greek and Roman mythologies, the idea of a woman telling her own story and the ideas of consent and things, they just don't exist, right? Being a mythological hero was for men, and not just men, but rich princes, largely. And so it's just a complete reversal of that narrative from the get-go. So we're already talking about like a level of literature consent that doesn't exist on just a strictly narrative basis in other cultures of that time, right? Then you move on to the Annunciation in the culture of Mary's time, right? So Luke opens the gospel not with the Annunciation, but actually with Zechariah entering the temple, right? The Annunciation of John the Baptist, right? And so there's this whole interaction, and what's happening is Zechariah is performing the highest and holiest action that it was possible for a Jew of that time to perform, right? He's going into the Holy of Holies to burn incense, right? He is literally going into the direct presence of God. So like at that moment, he is, for his time and culture, at the highest position you can be, right? And it's in this that, if you guys haven't read this, I'll just sum it up briefly. Basically, an angel comes to him and says, you know, like, you're going to have a son, even though your wife is really old, etc., etc. Zechariah essentially scoffs at the angel and is rendered mute. And this is really important. He's rendered mute. And why that's so significant is after these priests would burn the incense, right, they would go out to the assembly and give a blessing, right? When Zechariah was rendered mute, he was unable to give that blessing, right? So that's just like a complete stripping away of the point of his existence, right? He is a priest in the temple of God. The whole point of him being there is to communicate the divine presence to the people, right? And that's taken away from him. And then Luke instantly goes to Mary, who is in every way possible the complete opposite of Zechariah, right? Zechariah is a very learned man. He's a priest in the Holy of Holies. He was impliedly quite wealthy, just because poor men were very unlikely to have that sort of position. And then it goes to Mary, who is a woman in a time where women weren't taught, very likely weren't taught to read. They weren't necessarily taught the Torah the way men were taught, all these things in Galilee, which, as you know, in the Bible, Galilee is talked about tons of times, how it's the boonies. Like, it's literally, she's an illiterate 13-year-old from the boonies. She's the direct opposite of Zechariah. And yet it's to her that God basically gives us opportunity to collaborate in the divine mission, which all of time and all of history have been building up to. And which is just insane, right? Like, it's funny because to Catholics, we're very familiar with this story, but like, when you look at the time and the mythology from that time, that is radical. That did not exist. Women were there to be used for the purpose of others, right? So especially in like Roman mythology, which obviously was like the mythology of the conqueror of the time, and so it would have been spread everywhere, right? What do we have in Roman mythology? Europa being raped, right? Everybody being raped. Zeus just kind of took what he could and went with it. And then you also have like women suffering the retribution and punishment after that removal of agency, right? So like, Dinah, the mother of Perseus, right? She becomes pregnant after Zeus comes to her in a golden shower and then is shucked into sea, right? So they're completely abandoned after this. And of course, Mary is given all of this assistance. She's given Joseph, and she's given visions to flee to Egypt and all these things. And it really is like there really is no other example of this in ancient mythology or religion or literature. The only one you could maybe maybe make a case for is Isis from the Egyptian mythology. But even then, she is a goddess among many deities, whereas in I mean, I say our mythology, like our life as we know it, like we know there's only one God. And not only was she simply having an interaction with Proto-Mary, yes. Not only is she having an interaction with God, she is collaborating directly. St. John Paul II has amazing literature on this, on Mary's collaboration with the divine, but we're kind of running out of time, I think, so I will skip that. And it's funny because it doesn't stop there, right? Mary is a, yes, Redemptoris Mater. Yes, that's the whole thing. It's like this whole idea. So it doesn't stop there. The church, from its inception, like you can go back to the earliest church fathers. Oh, I still have 2 to 3 minutes. That's not typical of me. You can go back to the earliest of patristics, right? The first of the church fathers, and over and over and over again, Mary's significance is affirmed. So not only is this idea in this very modern sensibility of Mary being a tool for God and Mary simply being there as essentially like a person to have Jesus and then be shucked off, right? We know that that's not the truth. Mary is continually intercessing for us. And that's not a modern development made out of modern sensibilities. That's something that's existed since the very beginning of the church. You have Saint Irenaeus, right, with his The New Christ. And what does he say? He immediately talks about Mary as the new Eve. That is insane. Eve was the mother of all creation from all these cultures, right? Not just like Christianity, but all Abrahamic religions, right? And it's just crazy. I know I'm getting very excited about this. It's just very insane and like supremely radical. And so when authors like Atwood take this and pervert it, they're actually doing the exact thing that they claim that Christianity is doing, right? In their claim that we are taking a woman and taking away her agency and using her for the production for others, right? They're doing that same thing because they're stripping her of her natural agency that already exists. And not only her agency, but her intellect too. This is a very minor thread that was in my research. We can talk about it like in another place. But Mary is one of the only women in that age to be portrayed as somebody with real and true intellect, and like intellect, which is, you know, being able to receive and communicate, right? Like she becomes pregnant with the Lord and immediately goes to Elizabeth and delivers the Magnificat, which, by the way, like, again, a complete reversal of Zechariah, right? His ability to bless the people was taken away from him and in a sense given to Mary, because she directly goes to Zechariah himself. And if anything, preaches to him. Yeah, you'll see a lot of medieval art with Mary teaching Jesus or having a book open. Oh, thank you, Hunter. In tons and tons of medieval art, you'll actually see her as the angel is coming to her reading a book, because the idea is that she is the bearer of the word of God, and in that has the intellect to embrace that word of God. And of course, there's all those other scriptural references. You know, she ponders this deeply in her heart. She makes these active decisions. She is one of the only people to stay at the crucifixion when arguably it would be the most painful for her. And that's not trite, right? That's a decision of real hardship. And she is shown not only to bear that hardship, but to excel in bearing that hardship, which is a big deal. It's not shown often. For instance, you look at an example of quote unquote agency, right? Just the ability to make decisions and stuff. Maybe you could make an argument for like Medea, but even then Medea, it's a negative connotation, right? Her agency is shown to be negative and a bad thing. Whereas obviously in Catholicism, it is not only a good, but the highest good. It is the model to which we all should aspire. And so like our entire religion places a woman and says, this is who you should try to be like for all of your days, which is the exact opposite of the thesis of Atwood and all these authors like her and all these like very third wave feminists like her who insist that Christianity compels women and pushes them down and all these things. It is the opposite. And they in themselves, yes, the ancient feminists, it's garbage. It is garbage. The actual text of Medea's story, it is completely negative. That agency is something that we should desire her not to have, where in reality, Mary is specifically praised and venerated for an act of her agency, which is, again, unheard of in ancient religions. That does not exist until Christianity. It just doesn't, except for, yeah, like the Proto-Mary stuff, but not in the same way. And that's it. I don't know if anybody has any questions or something. You can always also DM me on Twitter. I'm Talitha Rising, by the way.
Thank you, Michaela. I could listen to like an hour more of that. 10 out of 10 would tune into the Mary live stream anytime.
Oh, hey, thanks.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Next up, we have William to tell us about.
All right. Can everybody see my talk here? Hang on. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. I don't see any.
Nope, you're good. I should have just come with the audio. We can see the whole thing.
Okay. If anybody has any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll try to like answer them at the end because I'm sure there will be some. Gradually great, incorporating the church's official music at your parish. This is going to be a talk about, if you couldn't guess by the title, the Roman gradual and all of the goodies contained therein. So first of all, I want to define a few terms. Whenever we talk about the ordinary, we're talking about music for the unchanging parts of the Mass. Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, Mysterium Dei, Agnus Dei. When we talk about propers, we're talking about music for the changing parts of the Mass. So parts that are proper to each celebration. That include introit, entrance antiphon, the gradual, the psalm chant, the Alleluia or tract before the gospel, the offertorio, the offertory antiphon, and the communion antiphon. Readings and prayers like the collect and prayer over the gifts can also be considered propers. Vatican II, actually extremely pro this. I am going to be talking about this in the context of the ordinary form of the Mass, the Novus Ordo, because I think that's where most of us are at and sort of where the biggest need for it might be. The reason I talk about Vatican II being extremely pro this is because at Vatican II, of course, there's an explicit mention that chant has a pride of place above other forms of music. And as well, Vatican II, the reforms that are begun at it liturgically result in, what you'll see in a second, a few big, I think, positive steps in making it more accessible to people. So first of all, I want to talk about a document, a post-conciliar document called Ordo Cantus Missae, or the Order of Sung Mass. OCM is a little-known document, and it complements the rubrics of the Roman Missal and describes how a full and complete ordinary form sung Mass should be celebrated. It's a very little-known document. The most recent edition is from 1987, and you can get a copy from Vatican Press for 1033 euros. But Ordo Cantus Missae is sort of the basis for this talk, because I'm sort of talking about how in one of these full sung masses, which I think every parish should strive to have at least one of on Sundays and holy days, this is how you should incorporate the church's official music. Another note, though, what about my precious hymns? A lot of people kind of freak out at the concept of introducing propers and chants because they think that it's going to exclude the use of hymns. And of course, we know that there are a lot of very good hymns. But if one views the ordinary form through a hermeneutic of continuity with the extraordinary, which if you don't do that, then the ordinary form can get a little crazy. There is nothing prohibitive about singing a hymn, a processional, offertory, communion, recessional, either before or after the proper chant. And if anybody here goes to a extraordinary form Mass, a traditional Latin Mass, there are usually hymns that are sung in addition to the antiphons there. So let's talk about official resources for this in Latin. The big one is the Graduale Romanum, the Roman Gradual, the newest editions from 1979. And this is the official music book for the ordinary form of the Roman Rite. It includes the complete propers or antiphons for every single Mass during the year. It's in Latin square note notation. You can get it from Vatican Press for 33.57 euros. You can get it from Canonical Nova, and I'm sure you can get it from Amazon or some other places, but I don't know them by name. But the Graduale Romanum existed before the ordinary form of the Mass, before the Pauline reforms. And so a question kind of came up about, well, what about parishes that want to incorporate the chants for every Sunday? Because, of course, Vatican II is trying to pull us out of the low Mass culture that exists in the American church at the time, and really the worldwide church, and emphasize the importance of the high Mass. But, a problem comes up. What if the choir is a little inexperienced or smaller? What if it's not even a choir as much as a congregation? So a post-conciliar book that's then published is the Graduale Simplex, or the Simple Gradual. The newest edition of that is from 2007. This allows for seasonal propers instead of daily propers, which can be sung by small or inexperienced choirs. It includes a handful of Masses throughout the year, and it's more simply arranged than the full Graduale Romanum. So there's 2 proper Masses for Advent, 3 for Christmas, 5 for Lent, I think 2 for Easter, and like half a dozen for ordinary time, and then a few like Blessed Virgin Mary, Saints, and Martyrs. And it also includes this simple Kyriale with simpler chant settings of the ordinary. The reason that I think this is so important is because if you are interested, if your parish is interested in trying to incorporate more Latin Gregorian chant, but the full Graduale is just too complicated, this is a great first step because, for the whole season of Advent, you can learn one of these Masses and sing it every Sunday. A little more complicated for Lent because there's one for every Sunday, but they're very simple. And then again, for ordinary time, you can learn a couple of these Masses and you just sing them every Sunday or every few Sundays. You can get it from Vatican Press for 29 euros or from Canonical Nova. There's also the Kyriale Romanum, the newest edition's from 1997, and it includes the complete ordinary for every season and Mass of the church year. Most people might not know, each season or theme of the church year actually has a special Mass setting specifically for it. So there's a whole Mass setting just for Lent, just for Advent, just for Easter, just for Masses of the Blessed Virgin Mary, etc. You can get it from Vatican Press for $9.48. And I should also mention that the ones that I've just talked about, you can also get them online for free, generally. Next, though, if your parish is maybe a little hesitant to incorporate Latin, maybe they're interested in incorporating the propers, but going the full Latin route is just not something that is feasible at the moment or that the parish is interested in, there are English versions of these books, or they're not direct translations from the International Commission on English in the Liturgy, but they are translated by other publishers or organizations, and they have imprimaturs and approvals from the church. The one we use at my parish, and one of the most popular, I think it's used at a few seminaries, is the Lumen Christi Simple Gradual. It's from Illuminare Publications, and it's like $12.95. The translations come from the Graduale Romanum, and it includes English propers for Sundays and holy days, and 18 different Mass settings in English and in Latin. The next, which is arguably the most simple to get into, I think, is Simple English Propers from Church Music Association of America. They're all free online, or you can get the book for $20. The source is the Graduale, and it includes English propers for every Sunday and holy day, major feast days, and ritual Masses like confirmation, funerals, Holy Week. Also, it's available free online, and there are free practice videos on YouTube for all the Masses. So down there, you'll see the entrance antiphon for Corpus Christi. Very simple. If you learn it on YouTube, one person, one cantor can bust that out, and it's very beautiful. The next one is the Lament Propers from Corpus Christi Watershed, $20 again. This one has very simple Gregorian psalm tones, so it's probably easier than the last two. And then after that, this is actually the first one we've talked about that is an English translation of the Graduale Simplex. So it's seasonal plain song arrangements for use at all Masses during the year. So there's a cut down there from one of the Masses of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I think that's the introit. And you'll see, it's relatively simple to sing. The reason that I'm sort of passionate about this and that I wanted to talk about this is because this is the church's official music. These are, in the case of the Graduale Romanum, the full book, these are tunes and songs that have been passed down for thousands of years to us. And it's music that Catholics have been singing, Roman Catholics have been singing for generations. And in the last, 50 years, we've really lost a sense of that musical connectedness. This music meant so much to our ancestors because it complements the readings at Mass and the themes that are present at Mass. We just celebrated Laetare Sunday, and the reason it's called Laetare Sunday is because the introit, the entrance antiphon, is Laetare Jerusalem, rejoice Jerusalem. We get so many of these names and traditions from these pieces of music that we sing. I want to bring up really quickly Pope Francis talking about Gregorian chant, because Pope Francis is also very pro-Gregorian chant. He says here, together you can devote yourselves better to song as an integral part of the liturgy, with Gregorian chant inspiring you as the first model. Take care together for artistic and liturgical preparation, and promote the presence of the Schola Cantorum in every parish community. Just imagine if with these resources, we were able to legitimately do that. If every parish had, at least at one of their Sunday masses, a Schola Cantorum to sing these beautiful songs of the church, the church has handed down to us. Francis also says, sacred music also reveals another duty, that of joining Christian history together. In the liturgy resound Gregorian chant, polyphony, congregational song, and music of the present day. It is as though all generations, past and present, were there to praise God, each with its own sensibility. What is more, sacred music and music in general builds bridges, brings people closer, even those far away. It knows no barriers of nationality, ethnicity, skin color, but draws in everyone in a higher language and always succeeds in bringing into harmony people and groups, even of very different origins. I think this sort of encapsulates why this music is so important and why it's worth preserving and continuing. Because whenever we sing these propers, it's just like entering deeper into the Mass, because just like, on a Sunday, for instance, we're all celebrating the same Mass. This Sunday, it'll be the 5th Sunday in Lent. When we sing these antiphons, we're also uniting with every other parish doing that, but also all the Masses throughout the centuries that have sung those same songs. I think I'm at the end of my presentation here. I'll go back to the title screen right here. I do just want to say that I know for a lot of people, you go into Mass and you pull out your missal, your missalette, your breaking bread, your St. Joseph Missal, and you see in there entrance antiphon, communion antiphon, and most people might not think anything of it and just not realize that these are actually entire songs that the church asks us to sing and be joyful about. So I just want to encourage you, with the resources that I have explained here, to think about how they could potentially be introduced to your parish. All the resources I've had here are going to be available afterward. I'll have them in a little PDF. I'm going to stop sharing.
So every single one of your cells, and that's the most basic unit of life, they're all made up of cells, is made up of this bilayer of phospholipids. And it's really cool because these lipids actually allow our cells to talk. They can talk to internal components, or they can talk to external components. So your cells can communicate with each other on a very basic molecular level. What we mostly know lipids and fat for is storage of energy. And what's really interesting is the structure that they are stored in is called a lipid droplet. So a lipid droplet can actually pinch off from a membrane and take some fat with it, or some lipid with it as well. So this is just a single phospholipid bilayer, or phospholipid monolayer, here with the triacylglyceride inside. And you may also have some sterols or some proteins on the surface of this lipid droplet. It's really fascinating because these storage molecules are found in all different sorts of organisms. So you have single cell yeast have lipid droplets. They're in red there. You also have in flies, they have storages of lipids. zebrafish, which is this very simple type of striped fish that they use in science a lot. And humans, most mammals have lipid droplets that they found so far. Okay, lipid droplets can actually be associated with disease. So you kind of got a bell curve here with body fat versus the population of population meaning how many lipid droplets, not like the human population. If you have too few, you can have a disease called lipodystrophy. That means your body stores fat in the wrong spots. If you have too many lipid droplets, you can have different types of metabolic syndrome, and it can contribute to different types of heart diseases, atherosclerosis, those types of things. So lipid droplets are also really important for diseases. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where you have a membrane from some type of cellular organ, and it can pinch off when your body, or excuse me, rather when your cell needs to move a lipid droplet from one side of the cell to the other. And I'm going to talk about some different processes focusing on early cell development, where that's necessary to move that large storage of energy for other parts of the cell. Okay, the really cool thing is that lipid droplets move. Oftentimes we think about fat, like we have these associations that it's sedentary, you know, that big like model of like fat tissue that just looks so gross, like it just looks like gelatinous grossness. But that's not true of fat. Fat moves. It can move around the cell. So this is just a graphic, a cartoon drawing of lipid droplets moving by these motor proteins here. And I have a couple of movies that are showing microscopy. So the white rings are the lipid droplets, and I'm not sure what type of cells these are. I think it's just like cells in a test tube. And I think they were human cells. I'm not 100% sure. But that's moving around, y'all. Like it is active. This is a cell that is doing what's called lipolysis. So what your cells do is they break up lipids, because lipids come in these like big long chains of carbons and hydrogens, and your body breaks those up to release the energy contained within those chemical bonds. Here's just another, oops, there we go. I like this one better. It's a little bit more clear. So you have all these lipid droplets moving around. So they're pretty modal. For different parts of the different needs of the cell. And what I studied when I was a master's student was the first cellular division. Not in humans, I studied it in worms, but that's beside the point. So what happens is we think that the lipid droplets move towards the nuclei. So immediately after post-fertilization, you have two nuclei from the sperm and the egg cell. And then after fertilization, the nuclei fuse to get ready for the first cellular division after a zygote has formed. And so the nuclei are the purple on the slide. The black circle is a cell, and then the lipid droplets are green. So what we've seen is that the lipid droplets move right next to the nucleus. What we think is happening is they're providing energy for all the cellular machinery and cellular mechanisms that have to go on. And then immediately after the first cell division, when you have a 2-cell embryo, you see the lipid droplets are still localized around the nucleus. This is a little bit fancier version of that, where we believe that the lipid droplets are moving along some cytoskeletal elements. Yes, your cells do have a skeleton just like you do. And so this is kind of the model that I proposed, thinking about how the lipid droplets are moving around before the cell. Okay. That was really quick, but that was my talk. And St. Albert the Great, patron of scientists, pray for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily.
You're welcome. If you have any questions about fat, feel free to DM me. My name is my Twitter handle.
Oh, how convenient. All right. Well, next up, we have Rachel. And here she is now. Let me...
Hello?
Hello.
Can people see me?
Yes, let me spotlight your video real quick, and you are good to go.
I don't have whiskey. I just have tequila. So it looks like I froze. Just a moment. There we go. Yeah, I don't have a very good webcam, so we'll see how this goes. I am talking today about Blessed Pier Frassati. He's kind of my dude, and I talk about him any chance I get. He's in my little Twitter bio, everything like that. So he's the man of the hour. So let me go ahead and see how I can share. Wait. Is it sharing? Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So this is a picture of Blessed Pier Frassati on his last mountain climbing trip. You can see that he wrote actually on the picture verso l'alto, which means to the heights, which is kind of the motto of his life. So he was born on Holy Saturday in 1901, which was April 6th. His dad, Alfredo, was the owner of it still exists, a very prominent Italian newspaper called La Stampa. His mother, Adelaide, was a painter. He had an older sister that sadly passed away before he was born at 8 months. And his younger sister was named Luciana. He was known for all sorts of different acts of kindness. For example, one time he was, his sister tells the story that when he was a child walking down the street, he saw a little girl without shoes. And the first thing he did was took off his own shoes and gave it to her. Another thing about him was that he was really, really sick when he was born. So they thought he was gonna die when he was first born. And they talk about how he was able to receive communion. So I just think like that's the way to start life that way. Sounds so cool. So as a young man, he was an engineering student. This was a issue of division within his family because his dad, as the firstborn son, his father expected him to take up the family trade and run La Stampa, but he loved mining engineering, and that's what he wanted to do. He was known to be like a real good, like he just liked to hang with his bros, and he was always smiling. He and his friends were known as the Tipiloshi Society, which was like the villain society. He would call himself, oh, I just lost it in my brain. I'll figure it out later. I'll remember. But he was very athletic, so he loved all sorts of sports, especially mountain climbing. We know that from some of his letters that he was in love with a young woman he knew named Laura, who was 3 years younger than him. His parents were having some marital issues though, and he did not want to cause any disturbance in the family by asking her to marry him. So they never got into a relationship, but I've read his letters and he mentions her all the time, but he'll just say like, you know what I think about her, and move on, which I think is really funny. So he was an extremely political guy too. he was extremely anti-fascist. Couldn't, despised Mussolini. In one of his letters, he talks about how he had his Catholic club posters, and it was torn down by the Freemason government. And he talks about, those rascals, the Freemasons. He was also a member of Catholic Action. That's kind of one of the things he's very known for. He was a member of all sorts of different clubs. One thing that he was, the real thing that he's definitely known for is his service to the poor. He was a member of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. And he was known, he would attend like weekly meetings. He would take medicine to the poor. He was known to buy, he was wealthy enough to travel first class, but he would buy third class tickets and give away the extra money to the poor. He had an extreme devotion to the Eucharist, received daily, beginning at age 12, and he was a third order Dominican. He consecrated himself to Mary at age 17 and was known to pray the little office on the way to and from school. Sadly, he did contract polio while serving while serving that in the slums with the poor. And his last instructions, because he had contracted polio, you could see his handwriting wasn't very good, but this was the last words. And when the priest visited him for last rites, he was really worried about his family cohesion because his parents had been having trouble. There was all these expectations of him, and he was just so concerned that this would break up the family. And the priest assured him that they would still be a family, even if he was, in heaven. And his final words were yes. And he died on July 4th of 1925 at the age of 24. So he was beatified on May 20th, 1990. The first miracle was the healing of a man with paraplegia. I'm not sure if I spelled paraplegia right. The cause for canonization is still waiting. He's the patron saint of a lot of different, so he's the unofficial patron saint of a lot of different things. Students, Catholic youth, skiers, Dominican tertiaries. Officially, though, he is the patron of World Youth Day and Italian confraternities like Catholic Action. Because of all his service to the poor, he was known as the Pope St. John Paul II called him the man of the 8 Beatitudes, because he really did live it with everything he could. I just think he's such an inspiration because he was like a young, vigorous guy. And, we talk a lot these days, kind of going back to what Patrick talked about, maybe about masculinity and femininity, but he was just such a caring guy. And I have a deep devotion to him, so I like sharing him, and I'll share about Pier any chance I get. But I guess that's it. That's what I have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel.
How do I get at this?
I will take care of that for you.
Oh, there we go.
I feel like I hear so much about Blessed Frassati, and yet it's all at a surface level. So this was a great deeper dive into it.
Yeah, I love him. He's the best.
All right. Next up, we have Melissa. hop on in here. Perfect.
Okay.
Let me make you a co-host and pin your video.
Okay.
And the floor is yours.
Share the screen. Oh boy. Okay. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Where is the screen? There we go. Okay. So I'm going to bore the hell out of you with a presentation I did for an anthropology class a few years ago. My background is sort of in the humanities, sort of in sciences. I can't make up my mind. So here I am. It's from an anthropology class, and we were supposed to show how societies could change over time. And one of the things that immediately came to my mind was the domestication of animals, and specifically in textile arts. It's one of the reasons that we've been able to found societies and build them, basically. So it's called Weaving a History, as you can see. And we'll just go right into it. And also, thank you guys for letting me be here. I feel way outclassed. So the discussion is how have humans caused physiological changes to domestic fiber-producing animals over time? That was the other part of it. We were talking about things like genetic drift and just how we could influence the evolution of other organisms. So through selective breeding techniques, humans have changed the genome of domesticated fiber-producing animals, such as sheep, over time to suit human need. And that's pretty pronounced. We've also developed symbiotic relationships with certain species specifically for fiber development, which sheep, alpaca, camels, yak, all kinds of critters. Both of these things, selective animal breeding, become mutually beneficial symbiotic relationships, have definitely helped to shape our modern society in multiple ways. We wouldn't be here the way we are now in this capacity without it. For my field work for this presentation, I got to interview Judith McKenzie, who, if you're into wool or fiber, or if you get into spinning or anything, she's kind of a big deal. So that was an exciting thing. I was able to do a phone interview with her. She's an expert in the field of both wool textile history and production and the history of sheep breed development. For many years, she had a ranch in Montana, really high wool producing part of that industry anyway. She's also the author of Visually Teach Yourself Hand Spinning and the Intentional Spinner, which I can recommend. McEwen's life working with wool began when she was 8 years old and continues today into her 70s as she teaches classes around the world. I have taken classes from her, and it's pretty informative stuff. And then the other sources include various academic texts sourced on the internet, which you will not be interested in. Early sheep domestication. Most wild sheep are not wool producing. Instead, they have hair coats, which is good for hides, but it's not good for spinning into thread. It's really coarse. Think of like a deer, what a deer fur feels like. So-called primitive sheep breeds, such as the Icelandic and Shetland, do have a naturally occurring double coat of outer guard hairs and inner downy wool fiber, which naturally sheds. Early peoples gathered the shed undercoats from the environment and spun and wove this fiber into textiles. Spinning and weaving began to show up around 9,000 years ago. So it predates actual farming, and I don't have the stats on that. But we were hunter-gatherers, and herdsmen before we were actually, situated in farming. There's evidence in Asia that humans began domesticating sheep around 10,000 years ago. Some of the reasons they may have begun keeping sheep was that wild populations had dwindled sharply. Sheep are valuable resources for hides, milk, meat, horn, and bone. Early peoples even used the sheep dung for fuel. They also began to use the wool for felt, but once they began to selectively breed sheep to have longer coats, they also began to spin the fibers into longer strands, which could then be woven eventually knitted, although knitting is a newer technology, into cloth. So I just want you to think about that all, and I might get into that later, but back through history, all textiles, all of the liturgical vestments, all of the ship sails, everything you saw was handmade, hand spun, hand woven. So just keep that in mind, especially when you're looking at historical liturgical garments. Human technology and animal husbandry. In her interview, Mackenzie mentioned pre-metal cultures, which was really interesting to me. Pre-metal cultures did not have the ability to shear sheep fleece, which must be shorn to be fully usable. The primitive sheep breeds had to shed their coats, which generally led to rougher fibers, unsuitable for fine cloth. Post-metal cultures developed the ability to shear the fleeces, making more use of the whole fleece. This does not hurt the animal, despite what activists will tell you. Humans began selecting sheep for fleece length, whiteness, and fineness. Intentional breeding produced strains of sheep with different and very specialized end purposes in mind. Heavy meat producers such as Cheviots, long wool producers such as Lincolns, short wool producers such as Southdowns, and dual purpose breeds, meat and wool, such as Corriedales. There were also extremely fine wool breeds like the Merino and Rambouillet breed, bred entirely for a very long, soft, white wool, which could be made into clothing worn next to the skin. Mackenzie states that this specialization, however, led to some unintended consequences. And as an aside, I would just like to say that another reason that they were breeding for whiteness and fineness is so that they could dye the cloth, so that they could make cloth and dye it whatever they wanted it to be. So that was highly prized. The unintended repercussions of intentional genetic manipulation. As we became better and better at selecting and manipulating breeds of sheep to suit our needs, we began breeding certain inherent traits out of them. By the mid-20th century, high production wool growers nearly bred the naturally colored gray, black, and brown wool into extinction. Side note, those are some of my favorite wools to work with, the naturally colored ones. Additionally, there was an increasing lack of variation in the gene pool, which will pop up later. Mackenzie was one of a growing number of people in the field that helped to bring back the naturally colored fleece by careful breeding. Mackenzie went on to speculate that in her opinion, sheep have helped shape modern human society nearly as much as we have directed the sheep genome. So it kind of went both ways, as often happens. Sheep are natural prey animals. They don't have biting teeth, claws. They're not swift runners. They're kind of dorks. And by extension, humans protected the sheep flocks, even as they also used them for food and clothing, and by extension, used their skins for parchment, which also plays into liturgical history. Because it was in our best interest to preserve the sheep, we did not completely eradicate them. However, in domesticating and breeding for certain characteristics, fleece length and growth, sheep became incapable of living in the wild. It's interesting that their fleece does not quit growing. So you may have noticed a few years ago, there was a sheep in New Zealand that got away from the herd for years, and they finally caught up to him. He looked like a humongous marshmallow just because the fleece continues to grow, and it will eventually kill them, just overproduction. They've lost that shedding capability in certain breeds. Wool is still a valuable commodity even in the modern era. The advent of synthetic fibers has not changed the fact that wool is a warm, strong, elastic, lightweight, and versatile natural fiber. Modern wool producers provide over 2 million tons of fleece a year. And of course, that leads to large-scale sheep ranching with negatively affecting the environment. Overgrazing, desertification, pollution from runoff, and chemical pollutants such as fertilizer and pesticides all play into that. So that is an ongoing, obviously, something to deal with as far as any future wool production. Modern sheep breeds are too many to list. Some of the older primitive breeds, which are really, really cool, they've been brought back through careful breeding programs in the late 20th century, preserving a small though important source of genetic variation. You may have seen those, you may have seen a Jacob sheep, which is a really old sheep breed, and they end up having like 4 or 5 different horns on their heads. They're wild looking. Thus, through direct human intervention over several thousands of years, we have been able to take a wild animal, domesticate it, and change its body such that it barely resembles its wild ancestors and cannot live in the wild. And bibliography, which you don't care about. And I'm probably way under time if I'm still online, I hope.
You're good. You are right at 10, actually. So well done.
Awesome. I was worried.
No,
Cool.
all good.
Well, if in the off chance that anybody has any questions, just DM me. I really doubt it.
No, that was fascinating. I know nothing about sheep or textiles, and now I do. So thank you, Melissa.
Yes, you're welcome. Thanks.
All right. So now I don't have to introduce anyone because it is my turn. So get ready for what I hope is a tight 8 minutes. Hello, I'm Hunter. You all know me by now. And I have a talk called Sports as Art, the second greatest story ever told. The first, obviously, being the whole entire Bible. All right. So I want to take my 10 minutes of the symposium to walk you through something very near and dear to my heart, the wide world of sports. I think that sports are one of the most beautiful things that God has allowed us to have on this earth, and I hope to share some of that beauty with you today. I think all good arguments begin with a thesis, and thus my thesis is as follows. Sports are as good a narrative medium as any other for storytelling, and as such should be considered art. I don't care much about what is and is not art exactly. It's a topic for another symposium, but I believe in the power of stories. As such, I'd like to begin with one. Here's a man scoring a goal in a soccer match. I'm going to hope the audio works.
The wide men have found little space in this contest. Not sure of Olatico and Joe at the moment. Certainly it's been true of the England team. Seen that match of hard draw of Trevor Stephen. Maradona just walked away from Hoddle then. They're appealing for offside.
So what did you just watch? As with any good story, I truly believe that you can spoil the ending and still keep your readers hooked. So the man who scored the goal is named Diego Maradona. He's an Argentinian footballer. He's one of the best soccer players of all time. He is playing for the Argentinian national team in the 1986 World Cup match. This match is a quarterfinal game against England. He tied the match 1-1 by scoring that goal. Previously, it was 1-0 England, just into the second half. He would go on to score one more goal in the second half. Argentina would win the match 2-1, advance, and eventually win the World Cup. Congrats to them. But who cares? Why is this goal considered one of the greatest of all time? Why does it matter that Argentina won a quarterfinal match in a random World Cup? To begin to answer that question, we have to go back to the teams playing. Argentina and England have one of the most fascinating rivalries in all of sports, primarily because they almost never play each other. This is a rivalry that spans continents. This is a rivalry that may be played once every 4 years at the World Cup, and maybe only then, if the playoff structure aligns just right, that the two teams match up. The first time these teams have ever played each other was in 1951, and the passion for this rivalry didn't exactly ignite until 1966. How many times have Argentina and England played each other since 1966? 9 times. Imagine getting a chance to face your most bitter rival every 6 years. No other American professional sports league has a rivalry that doesn't play at least once every 3 months during the course of their seasons. The last time Argentina and England clashed in a meaningful World Cup match was 18 years ago. But to understand why this 1986 match was so vicious, we have to zoom out from sports and start to look at the politics surrounding it. On April 2nd, 1982, 4 years before this soccer match, Argentina invaded and occupied the British-held Falkland Islands, as shown on the map. The British government engaged the Argentinian naval and air force units 3 days later and prepared for an amphibious attack on the islands. 74 days later, Argentina surrendered, and the islands were returned to the British. These events are not as cut and dry as they seem. In 1965, 21 years before this soccer match took place, Argentina and the United Kingdom were called to the United Nations in order to resolve a sovereignty dispute over the Falkland Islands. The UK fully planned on ceding the islands to Argentina. This would make sense for islands 8,000 miles away from their current governor. However, the islanders themselves of the Falklands refused to call themselves Argentinian, and the Argentines wouldn't have them unless they were considered Argentine. So the deal fell through. In 1891, 5 years before this soccer match, General Leopoldo Galtieri rose to power in Argentina in a military junta. He was aided by an admiral in the Argentinian army, Jorge Anaya. Anaya was the mastermind behind the plan to invade the Falklands, supposing that the United Kingdom could not possibly care enough to respond militarily. Anaya cut off supplies to the islands later that year and privately promised to invade if no UN resolution of the issue could be passed by 1982. They did invade, and after the British counterattack, over 11,000 Argentinians were captured and 600 killed. General Galtieri would claim that his attack was to liberate the people of the Falklands from British imperialism. His government would collapse a year later, while the Thatcherite conservatives in Britain would win a landslide election and remain in power for 8 more years, solidifying their relationship with the United States in the process. Back to soccer. It's impossible to communicate how much Diego Maradona, the man who scored that goal, means to the Argentinian people. He was named the greatest soccer player to ever live in 2010 and was named by FIFA as the player of the century in 2000. He gave Argentina its second and still most recent World Cup victory. You could put Babe Ruth, Michael Jordan, and Bo Jackson together, and you still wouldn't begin to fathom how important Maradona is to Argentina. This was his team, and this was his time. This match wasn't just won in a rivalry that spanned oceans, outlasted dictatorships, and had decades of history leading up to it. It was at a fundamental level about winning. The Argentinian people had lost lives, government, and territory many thought was rightfully theirs. Whether it was or not is an ethical gray area. Who deserved the Falklands? Who deserved to win this match? Like Gatsby's and Holden Caulfields of old, you may not be inclined to root for the protagonist here if you can decide that one of these two teams is one. My point is that there are facts here and then there are realities. The fact is that the Argentinians won the match. The fact is that the Falkland Islands are a British territory. The fact is that Argentina and England never officially declared war, and diplomatic relations were restored within their nations in 1990. The fact that is in 2013, the Falkland Islanders voted 1,513 to 3 to keep the island under British control. The reality is that Argentina won the cup, and they did so on the back of Maradona's quarterfinal goal. Let's take a look at the still frame of the goal, one of the most iconic photos in soccer history. That's a handball, clear as day. Maradona used his hand to propel the ball into the net to score that goal. The referees should have seen this, they should have called the goal back, and the game should have gone on 1-0 to England. But maybe then Maradona doesn't score that second goal. Maybe Argentina loses this match to England, a rivalry in which they hadn't won a game in the past 22 years. And maybe the World Cup moves on. But the reality is that it didn't. The goal stood, Argentina won. They won the cup on the back of a goal that never should have counted. The sports here, in their literal sense, are done wrong. The rules were not followed. But does it matter? I want you to watch this clip again with me knowing what you know now about this goal. Listen to the crowd, hear the punch of the ball, think of the Argentinians in the crowd. Their team should not have scored, but they won.
The wide men have found little space in this contest. It's not true of Hetch-Hetchty at the moment. Certainly it's been true of the England team. Seen that much of Giorgio or Trevor Stephen. Maradona just walked away from Model then. Maradona. They're appealing for offside. The ball came back off the foot of Steve Hodge.
Maradona was asked after the match about the goal, about whether he'd made contact with the ball with his hand or with his head, and he replied, "The goal came a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God." Thank you. I hope the audio worked throughout that whole thing. All right, perfect. Next up, second to last for the evening, is Paige. Thank you, guys. Paige, where are you? Come give us a talk.
Hello. Sorry, I was like waiting for you to unmute me, but I guess I could have turned my camera on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you are
Awesome.
loud and clear. Let
Beautiful,
me
wonderful.
Post and put you in the middle.
Hold on. I'll wait for you. Okay, here we go. Screen share.
All right, the floor is
one.
yours.
Share. Present. Hello, everybody. My name is Paige. You might know me as Claudia or Timmy on Twitter. I'm 23 years old.
Sorry, your audio is super rough at the moment.
Oh, hold on.
Oh, wait, it may have fixed itself.
Are we okay?
Yes, we're clear now.
All right. So I'm 24 years old. I am a nurse, and I have not been mentally stable since Vine died. Okay. So anyways, memetics is the study of transfer of information and how it is spread. It's based on the model made by Darwin on evolution, and it's used to study how different bits of culture is spread and is changed and can be imitated. And at one point there was actually a journal of memetics in the late 90s and early 2000s. So basically what I'm saying is I could have been a memeticist and gotten a degree in memes, but alas. So that kind of brought me to the question, what is a meme? And while I was looking into this, I wanted to know how the educated people of the world would define it and where that term came from. It's from ancient Greek, memetes, and it means imitator, pretender. So the same kind of root word as mime, memory, mimic, things like that. And a guy named Richard Dawkins coined it in 1976, almost a decade before the internet even existed. So obviously this is not the intended use for the random pictures that we share, but he wanted a word that sounded like gene to support his theory that bits of information can be spread and mutate in culture, just like genes can be spread and mutate in biology. So a meme, by its proper definition, is a cultural unit. It carries ideas that can be transmitted from people's minds through writing, speech, etc. And it has a mimicked theme. Basically, a meme is a unit of culture. And these memes, as you know, can be copied, can be mutated online, and they kind of even compete for survival in a way. So memes evolve, and therefore human culture can evolve. That brought me to wondering what the first meme created ever was. The definition as we know it today is obviously a lot different than what it was when it was coined in 76. And it turns out that the history actually goes back to World War II. Oh, that's my camera. World War II. And the graffiti of the Kilroy was here, picture up on the top. that was a tag that was popular by soldiers. They would kind of use it to just be like, hey, I was here. And that kind of spread around through different cultures. It kind of can be found everywhere throughout the world. Gosh, this is not, I'm so sorry. So with social media and the ability to spread this information around, obviously it became a lot easier to share these memes. And I'm sure you all remember the old videos like Rick rolling, throwback to earlier today. Charlie bit my finger, the Gummy Bear song, the Harlem Shake, the original memes like Success Kid, Bad Luck Brian, the Irma Gerd girl. I literally could probably list these for an hour and not be done. Those kind of evolved into the rage comic faces on the picture here. And then from that have evolved into the memes that we know and love today. So once Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. could all kind of talk to each other, the meme sharing exploded a lot. And I know I've come across posts that appear on multiple platforms at once. But back in the 2010s, we were kind of still limited by that technology of the day. I can't believe I'm saying that. It's already 2020. And I'm sure it's hard to remember a time that Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram did not support video content, but there was a day that that happened, and that's where the fun begins. Orson Welles once stated that the enemy of art is the absence of limitation, which in my opinion means that without some form of constraint, left unchecked, media becomes either difficult to produce or we experience an abundance of really bad media. If we put limits on media, it forces creators to put it easily, get creative. So what sort of limitations am I talking about? Well, the Vine limitation, time limits. In June of 2012, Vine arrives on the social media scene, fills the need for new social media to share videos and video memes specifically, and that was not possible on other forums at the time. The creators pitched this idea as a way to capture short videos and moments in your life and share them. So they pitched this idea to Twitter, and the higher ups there thought it sounded like a good counterpart to the product they were already selling. Short little snippets of your life crammed into 140 characters. So they bought it for $30 million. And in just 6 months, Vine had over 200 million users consuming over 1.5 billion loops every single day. That's an insane amount of content. Even with the restricted time frame, there was so much good content, in my opinion, on Vine. What started as these little video diaries kind of morphed into all kinds of different rapid fire storytelling, stop motion animation, comedy series. And that 7-second limit forced the people that made these videos to find creative ways to work around that time constraint, because you also could not edit the video once you made it. You had to do it one go every time and time it right and cut it just perfectly. You couldn't edit it beforehand and upload it to the app. So it required a lot of time management and planning in a way, but the end result was still fairly chaotic and a lot of fun. Adding to that addiction, it was kind of possible to consume hours worth of media in what felt like a really short amount of time. Anybody who uses TikTok right now, you know how you can be scrolling for 20 minutes and you look up and it's been 3 hours. That being said, Vine has all the qualities of a good meme. It's easily shared, it was easily mimicked, easily mutated. You could kind of make fun of it or tease something, reference other videos in your video. It was short and shareable, and the algorithm in the app allowed quote unquote successful memes to be easily seen and widely spread, and that's what makes a Vine iconic. Honestly, nowhere else in the world have I experienced a piece of media that can get me rolling on the ground laughing in less than 7 seconds. That's the power of Vine and the power of memes in general. Obviously, I've posted a lot about using Vine as a coping mechanism, but in all seriousness, we know that laughter makes people feel better when they're in a bad mood. That's why a significant portion of our generation kind of uses memes and humor to cope with everyday life. Memes are a form of social bonding right now, and I know there's a catalog of Vines on YouTube to turn to when I feel like life is just too much. It's like watching your favorite movie or eating your favorite comfort food. It's, you know, the content, you know, the context sometimes. Maybe there's a new twist on a thing you've seen before, but it's comforting. And I've actually found research that supported this. especially surrounding medical workers and even disaster victims. Again, somebody a lot smarter than me wrote like a 40-page paper just about the memes that came after Hurricane Harvey. I don't have time to get into it really, but the bottom line was that it's okay to use memes to cope, and it's effective, at least temporarily, to help cheer you up. It's obviously not going to cure your depression, but at least it'll distract you long enough to maybe take a new perspective on things. One creator that I found online said, if I can make one person laugh long enough to forget their problems for a moment, then my day was not wasted. The way that we communicate is so fundamentally different as internet natives. It's easy to see why most adults don't get it. Making and sharing memes about depression, anxiety in school and things like that gives us an avenue to address these difficulties and problems and know that we're not alone in facing them. When you find a meme that's relatable, you know that at least one person understands what you're going through because they had to have made it. So if Vine was so great, why did it die, you may be wondering? Well, at the end of 2012, Vine's startup year, Snapchat enabled its 10-second videos. In 2013, Instagram added video capabilities, increasing it from 15 seconds to 60 seconds, and now we even have Instagram TV, up to like 10 minutes, I think. And Twitter added video support in 2015 and upped their character limit. All of this happened kind of quickly, and Vine couldn't really keep up. The founders of Vine didn't want it to be monetized. They didn't take a cut of the advertising money that they paid out to the Vine stars from the brands that used them. And since they didn't want to kind of sell out, they couldn't keep up with the content that was being created and posted everywhere else because of the 7-second time limit. So that novel idea that gave Vine its creative boost in the beginning was kind of also its downfall. It's a bit poetic, really. On October 27th, 2016, Vine announced that it would no longer allow you to upload content, and it shut down the creative process side of things. In 2017, Vine announced that the entirety of the content that was still available there would be put into an archive online. And then in 2019, the archive was taken down, and you can only find the website of like a specific Vine if you already have the direct URL link to it. Sadly, Vine obviously is no longer with us, but thank you to the valiant effort of the internet generation. It lives on in our hearts, on YouTube, in our memories. And Vine pretty much died just like all great memes do. She went viral, was whisked off into internet oblivion, and now we just remember it as something that was fun that happened a long time ago. So I actually do have resources for this if anybody's interested. And if you follow my Twitter, you know that I'm doing a March Madness bracket to find the most iconic Vine of all time. So if you want to participate, go to my page and vote for your favorites. That's all I got. Thank you all for listening to my rant.